me be completely honest. Elden Ring is fucking awesome. The beginning of this year has been full with huge ass games. But so far, this is the one I enjoyed the most. It's hard to put down the controller long enough to even make this video. That doesn't mean the game is perfect though. And seeing perfect 10 out of 10s or 5 out of 5s from every major reviewer or magazine under the sun just had me lose a bit more of my already very limited supply of respect for these outlets. Just because the game is great and maybe even the most fun I had with a major release in a long while, doesn't warrant that much one-sided praise from professional critics. But maybe this is just a problem with having a scoring system for something like video games. Do all the good elements add up until we reach 10? Are bad elements just subtracted? So does a 10 out of 10 mean that there are 10 times as many good elements in this game as there are bad ones? Yeah, I really don't like video game scores. Video games aren't dishwashers and game critics aren't the Consumer Reports. And that said, this is not going to be a review. I'm not nearly knowledgeable enough to review this game or any Souls game. Also, most of my videos are more first impressions. Well, not my actual first impressions in the moment, but my thoughts after having played for a bit and taken some notes and got my thoughts in order. And I haven't nearly seen everything this game has to offer. Not that I think one has to see everything in a game to review it. For a complete analysis, of course. But not for a rough breakdown of a game, for purchase advice or for a critique of specific elements of a game. So this video won't tell you everything there is to know about Elden Ring. I won't cover every issue because I don't know every issue. I'm going over my experiences so far with the game. I'm going to compare it to the other Souls games and other games. And I'm going to present and critique its strengths and flaws to the best of my ability to give you an idea what this game is about. So, let's start. This game is distinctively Dark Souls. Even if you've never played a Souls game, you most assuredly have heard of the series or subgenre. It's these incredibly hard games that have you die over and over again and throw a wrench at you at every opportunity. Well, that's not the whole story. While the Souls games can be quite hard, especially when you're new to them, and while they use player death as a learning tool, and while the games, at times, love to surprise you with death traps, it's so much more than that. Souls games are tight and meticulously designed gauntlets full of dangerous enemies and deadly traps. The game is ready and capable to kill you within seconds at any moment. In turn, you are presented with incredibly tight controls and a number of different tools and abilities to fend off your dangerous adversaries. You have to always stay alert, approach challenges carefully, but not in a passive way. The games want you to observe and quickly understand the threat before you, and act in accordance to overcome it. And enemies won't grant you any room. They attack relentlessly, driving you into a corner, so you need to look through their attack patterns, find an opening, and exploit their weaknesses to defeat them. Not counting early game fodder enemies, most foes take multiple hits to be killed, but can deplete your HP with just a few strikes. And different magic spells aside, your moveset doesn't really change throughout the game, while enemy attacks get more complicated and sophisticated over the course of the game. So you really have to put in some effort to learn attack timings, read animations and memorize enemy attack patterns, and master the simple yet versatile combat controls. And even though this game features a massive open world, all the basic mechanics are pretty much the same as in previous Dark Souls, though they have been expanded and there are some new additions. You still attack with R1 and R2 for quick and heavy attacks respectively. You still dodge and roll out of harm's way with the circle button or B, and equipment load still affects the speed and length of your roll. You can still block with a shield by holding L1 or parry with L2 to open up the enemy for a critical strike. You still cast magic by equipping a magic wand as a weapon, select one of your limited active spells and use the attack button to activate it. You will once again creep through dark crypts, across battlements and through elaborate castles, always wary of the countless enemies lying in wait for you and deal with them either quickly and efficiently or utterly incompetently. But now there's so much more. Since you now have to travel across vast landscapes, you'll get a horse for faster movement. So now you can reach your destination faster or get away quickly from overwhelming enemy forces. There's even mounted combat, where you attack to the left or right with either the L or R buttons. You can hold the strong attack button to drag your weapon over the ground and create an active hitbox to slice and dice every enemy you pass by. And it's fine. A lot of people praise the horse combat in this game, and I guess it might be pretty good, but I just can't get into it. There's also horseback archery and magic, but again, it's just not my thing. It's kinda weird how you have to stop when shooting a bow or crossbow, kinda defeats the point in my opinion. Well, sneak attacks are still a thing, and now there's even a simple sneaking mechanic where you duck down and create no or next to no sound anymore. There's even tall grass straight out of Far Cry 3 or any other game that copied this system, where you're just invisible as long as enemies don't bump into you. You can once again two-hand your weapons or dual-wield and get access to power stances. You can even two-hand shields and beat up enemies like a boss. Blocking got an upgrade where you can now perform a follow-up attack after successfully blocking an attack. It's a lot easier to pull off than parrying, but it doesn't stop combo attacks, so you're wide open while performing a follow-up attack. If it connects though, you have a high chance to stagger the enemy and open them up for a critical hit. An awesome addition that gives the combat system more depth without altering your moveset. The plunging attack is gone, but has been replaced with jumping attacks. And to perform those, you'll have to make use of the new jump button. Yeah, I guess Sekiro already let you jump, but this game differs from other Souls games in so many ways that I don't really include it when I'm talking about this serious franchise thingy. But yeah, now you can actually jump in a Souls game. You can perform horizontal light attacks or vertical heavy attacks mid-jump that can cause enemies to stagger. You can also avoid enemy attacks by jumping, as well as ground-based area of effects. The jump also opens up the level design. Gone are the days of being stopped from exploring by knee-high, can you even call it a wall? Now you can climb mountains, well, jump up mountains, platform your way up buildings and ruins, really don't give a fuck about the intended path and jump off the battlements and make your way over the rooftops and just see what you can find. Yeah, the open world has less tightly crafted encounters, since you can approach a group of enemies from any direction and disengage in any direction. You can jump up a rock to avoid a foe or just climb on your horse. That doesn't mean though that the developers cut any corners. Everything in this world, every enemy, every dilapidated shack, every hill and rock and mountain, every lake, every forest, big or small, has a reason for being there. Everything was placed with purpose. Of course, since the world is bigger and filled with way more explorable structures, there are a lot of copy-pasted objects. You'll often encounter the same ruins or houses just thrown together in a different way every time. The smaller dungeons look all pretty much the same, either a mine with winding shafts connected by larger rooms or completely angular catacombs. These dungeons don't take much time though and have minor boss fights at the end that, while they are unique encounters every time, they do copy and reuse bosses from other dungeons. But these dungeons are fine. They're not the best the game has to offer, but just a way to fill the world with content. And there are still many major and minor locations that are incredibly well crafted. The first, let's call it major level, is a huge castle that really reminded me of the Boletaria Palace from Demon's Souls. God, I love that level. And I really enjoyed this evolution of it. The castle is designed, well, like an actual castle, and leads you really naturally through its corridors, battlements and castle streets, with enemies carefully placed in your path, ready to ambush you. You can find a lot of little secrets, open up shortcuts and spend hours just exploring. The more open design influenced the dungeon layout a lot, but the acclaimed From Software level design still shines through. And as an open world game, it reminds me a lot of Breath of the Wild for two reasons. First, this game, same as Breath of the Wild a few years back, released alongside and subsequently stole the thunder of the respective Horizon game. Damn, guerrilla games really have bad luck when picking release dates. The other reason is its approach to open world game design. This isn't brutal Skyrim or Witcher Prepare to Die edition. As I've already said, everything appears to be purposefully placed in this world. Nothing seems to be placed at random. Rewards for exploration are always something substantial. There are some minor rewards like the many crafting components you'll find all over the place, and yeah, there's of course the mandatory crafting system, but it seems to be completely optional and just something to give you an edge or help you out in a pickle. But whenever you'll discover and clear a location, you'll get something special out of it. A new and unique piece of armor or a weapon that doesn't just drop from enemies. This isn't Skyrim, where you mostly find the same pieces of equipment with a slightly different stat bonus. You can find chalices to strengthen your healing flasks or seeds to increase their number of uses. You can find character upgrades that let you wear more accessories or memorize more magic spells, and you can find a bunch of spells and weapon abilities. Because of this, the exploration feels really satisfying, especially since every time you stumble across a temple ruin or a stronghold or some weird and outlandish construct, it feels like you truly discovered something special, completely on your own. Since there are no quest markers or other gamey elements that lead you through the world by the hand, the game mostly doesn't stop you from going anywhere, and there aren't hundreds of menial and potentially lore or immersion breaking side quests that send you all over the place to show you where all the cool locations are. Sometimes NPCs mention a place, but more often than not you discovered the place before you found the associated NPC. And quests in Souls games are invisible, not really like quests in other RPGs. It's more that something happens to some of the NPCs when you progress in the story. A woman fled a castle run over by monsters, and after you cleared the castle of all the monsters and returned to her, you find her dead next to one of the monster's signature weapons. A guardian ignores you completely, but after you acquire a certain item, he turns hostile and attacks you. A woman mourns the death of her companions at the hands of a mad tyrant, and in his castle you can find a keepsake of her friends and bring it back to her to ease her pain and have her become a useful merchant. These quests don't follow an obvious progression, they don't spell out what you have to do. From your perspective, the NPC just gave you a bit of exposition. The quest itself is invisible and progresses organically when you stumble upon the next piece of information. You feel like you accomplished something with ingenuity, not just by following instructions. And speaking of ingenuity, that's another thing the game shares with Breath of the Wild. There are a lot of little tricks you can find out, some alternate uses for some of the mechanics, like some weapon abilities to be used for movement, or the weather affecting some of your spells. If you don't want to deal with the Souls' typical poisonous swarms, just get on your horse and you're completely immune. Dismounting your horse also has two different animations. One where you climb off slowly when you're standing still, and one where you're jumping off while charging, that can be used to get to a higher position in the heats of battle. The game also took notes from Breath of the Wild's map system. In contrast to other open world RPGs, this game doesn't feature quest and location markers or a mini-map, and it doesn't clutter your map with hundreds of markers for things to find. It only shows you the things you've already discovered. Your activated bonfires are marked down so that you can fast travel to them, and every dungeon and important place is depicted with a small illustration. Though there are some helpful hints on your map. Spots where you can find another map piece are already marked down, and mines where you can find upgrade materials are also depicted on your map once you've found the map piece for this area. But it's tastefully included in the actual drawing of the map and not as a marker. You can also manually set up to 100 markers to remind you of roaming bosses you haven't beaten yet or NPCs you need to come back later. The only thing that does give you a sense of direction is a short path of light you see at any bonfire or site of grace, as it's called in this game. These light paths point you in the general direction of story events or other major events. It's a fine little addition, but you'll soon ignore it and explore the way you want. The open world design comes with some flaws, though. First off, since you can go pretty much anywhere and tackle every ruin, every mini dungeon, every greater location at any time, the difficulty is kind of all over the place. And it's not always clear whether or not you're supposed to be in a certain area. Since the game is made to be punishing, since enemies are meant to be stronger and more durable than you never know if an enemy is meant to be really hard or if you're just underleveled. This didn't really happen in previous Souls games. Sure, there was always a bit of non-linearity in those games. Multiple areas opening up at the same time, so sometimes you stumble into an area with enemies a bit too strong for your current level, but the levels themselves progressed in a linear fashion. So the difficulty increased incrementally, mostly. There were some difficulty spikes even in previous games. But here, so roaming bosses aside, which are fine and really sell you on the whole idea of a hostile world, but there's no consistency in how strong the enemies are in any given area. In the starting area, you encounter soldiers who die in like 3 hits. You come across a small outpost where there are some stronger variants and even a commander that can pack quite a punch. Following a path up the hill to the first mandatory boss and the first dungeon, you come across more crossbowmen that aren't too strong. When this huge ass troll just jumps down from above and begins wailing on you. He kills you in 2 or 3 hits, but you need to hit him like 100 times while he has 10 times your reach. And if you explore off the beaten path in this area, you'll come across 1,000,000 of them. So okay, there are some overpowered enemies in lower level areas, but I mean, it's a fucking giant, what did I expect? But this does happen with regular enemies as well. You only know how powerful an enemy is after you've already attacked it. And this is all well and good for enemies in the open world. I mean, I'd still want a logical increase in difficulty, but random roaming enemies can of course have vastly different power levels. But this irregular difficulty curve also applies to the main story. The first mandatory boss is a massive roadblock. He deals a fuck ton of damage, can take 1,000,000 hits, has a huge ass weapon as well as magical weapons that can penetrate your shield, and most of his attacks home in on you until the very last moment before impact. I died a bunch of time to him until I decided to explore the open world a bit more, level up, find ways to upgrade my healing flasks, strengthen my weapons, before I returned and got my ass handed to me a bunch more. But now I did more than just scrap damage to him, so it felt more like I had a chance. And it's great that the game allows me to do that, but it doesn't communicate it very well. It feels really weird when I'm following the main story, approaching a castle, facing a boss, and after that getting to explore the castle, to just fuck off in the middle of it and do some completely unrelated stuff and come back 5 hours later. The game also really loves to throw huge groups of enemies at you. Most of the time they're fodder, at least for the recommended level, but still. Souls games don't really lend themselves to battles with large groups of enemies. It works with enemies like rats or dogs, not that it's very fun. But as soon as you have a small army of humanoids with weapons, it just comes off as cheap. So, Souls games always bound you to some rules that didn't apply to the enemies. In tight quarters, you were always on the back foot with weapons that attacked in an arc or swing. Because when your weapon hit a wall, it bounced back off and stopped the attack animation, but locked you in place until you recovered. Enemies didn't have that weakness. Their attacks could phase through walls. This never sat well with me. I think it would have been better if enemy attacks were stopped by the walls as well. They could have filled tight corridors with more beasts or unarmed enemies to compensate for that. Enemies also always had Type A co-op activated, which means they couldn't attack each other, most of the time. There were some attacks that could hit other enemies as well, but the vast majority of normal attacks from standard enemies just went through other enemies and only inflicted damage on the player. And while I still find this a bit weird, it was fine because you didn't notice it too often, since you mostly fought single enemies or small groups. In this game that at times throws 10 or more enemies at you armed with spears or axes, you'll really notice this. Clumps of enemies standing shoulder to shoulder, striking through each other to hit you. a barrage of blows raining on you, never giving you an opening to strike back. This happens with large enemy groups, but also with some single enemy fights. It seems enemies in this game are way more often prone to spam their special attacks without regard for stamina or mana usage, and only have a small recovery time in between those attacks. In addition to that, most of the attacks lock onto you right up to a few frames before it connects. I had enemies jumping away from me but changing direction in the air to hit me with a melee blow, or rotating around lightning fast to keep me centered in their AoE attack. Bosses and mini-bosses sometimes have an attack chain of 6, 7 or 8 wide-range spinning blows that can't always be interrupted by blocking or parrying, and is too fast for a follow-up attack, with a recovery time long enough for you to get maybe one attack in, if you have some stamina left from rolling out of the way or blocking. Even if I'm good enough to avoid each strike, my stamina is limited by my level and build, so with these relentless attack patterns, you really feel when you're underleveled. Many boss attacks are also designed to fuck you over. In addition to every blow homing in on you, to the point where enemies just stop their momentum mid-air to keep their lock on, enemies often hold their attack for a moment to bait you into dodging and hit you while you're recovering. And while this isn't bad in and of itself, some animations have the boss prepare a swing with a massive weapon, start the attack for a heartbeat, and then hold for the amount of 1.5 dodge rolls, by that losing any momentum and build up strength, to then just continue the attack normally, which just doesn't look right to me. Then there are other enemies who seem to not even have attack frames. One moment they have the weapon readied, the next the attack has already been carried out. I guess they gave the bosses more, well, let's say less fair attacks, because most of the time there's a bonfire right outside the boss room. So you can try again without delay. And that's the thing with many people saying this game is the most approachable and maybe even easiest Souls game, and rightfully so. It doesn't mean that a single enemy encounter is easier than in previous games. I'd say it's even harder in many instances, way more punishing in the moment, demanding more of your patience and skill. No boss in Demon's Souls was as infuriating as the first mandatory boss in Elden Ring. But in Elden Ring, I don't have to traverse a gauntlet of enemies before I can try again. In Elden Ring, I can do a million other things, learn more about the game's mechanics, get special equipment, and level up my character until I'm strong enough to beat the boss into submission. Something that was technically possible in other Souls games, but not as easy to do if you didn't want to grind the same enemies in the same area for hours. Large groups of enemies or relentless monstrosities aren't really that bad when you can just jump on your horse for a speed boost or summon your own creatures to assist you in battle. Yes, this game has its own Pokemon system, where you collect spirit ashes that you can level up and summon into most boss battles and in greater locations in the open world. You have to be in a summoning area as indicated by a blue symbol on the right side of the screen, and you can only summon once per encounter, but it's still incredibly helpful to have more creatures for the boss to target that can even deal damage of their own. And all that without increasing the boss's stats as it is with player summoning. And this also got made more accessible. There's no humanity or soul form or any of that in this game, so you don't need to take a constant risk of being invaded if you want to just have the option for co-op. Player invasions are still a thing, but now this only happens after you started a co-op session. NPC summoning signs are available in front of boss doors without you having to waste a consumable item, so you can summon help every time you like. And while players can still set down their own signs to be summoned by another player, there are now these summoning pools near bosses or dungeons where you can find a player you want to play with more easily. Experimentation is also more encouraged. Souls games were always about experimenting and finding hidden tactics and alternate item uses. But the game punished you harshly for getting it wrong. Resources are rare, and if you spent them on the wrong item, you wasted them. Tried a rare consumable item on a boss that isn't susceptible to it? Well, tough luck. And since the game saves after every action, you can't just go back and try something different. Not with this game. Upgrade materials come in abundance, and now you don't have to reinforce a weapon with special materials to permanently alter its elemental type. Elden Ring introduces Ashes of War that are equipable special weapon abilities with the added bonus of altering a weapon's element as long as the ash is equipped on this weapon. You can swap between your ashes at every bonfire and just experiment with all the different combinations to your heart's content. So aside from your build, the game doesn't force you to commit to a certain playstyle. If an enemy is too hard, just try a different weapon ability or change the element of your weapon at the next bonfire. And there are a bunch more little quality of life updates, and many more I most assuredly haven't even discovered yet. You can fast travel from the start, which isn't really something I want to do in a Souls game, but I guess it's necessary in an open world game. As long as you're not in a cave or other underground location and not currently in battle, you can just teleport away whenever you want. So you can even use this to escape from a place if you're afraid to die to the next group of enemies. And you don't have to travel to the Nexus and from there to the next location. Just select the destination and you're golden. Leveling up, sorting your item chest, equipping weapon abilities or switching out spells are all done from the bonfire. No need to get back to a specific NPC or location. Though you still have to visit the weaponsmith or other trainers to upgrade some of your spells and weapons. Summons can just be swapped out right there on the spot, not even a need to go back to the bonfire. From Software even showed some mercy when it comes to fighting in dangerous places. When doing consecutive attacks that move you forward, you don't need to worry about dropping off the edge in tight places, at least not when the drop would be fatal. So yeah, the game is way more approachable than previous Souls games, but that doesn't mean it's easy or instantly a good time for newcomers, or that this is a game with mainstream or mass appeal. This is still a Souls game, a game made for a certain niche, for players who want a certain amount of challenge, who want to explore a hostile world without much handholding, who trade cinematic set pieces and flashy battles for methodic exploration and slow and heavy combat. No, this isn't a game for everyone, and this isn't a game everyone can get good at. There are people with certain disabilities that prevent them from playing these games, at least the intended way, and there are people that can't get into certain playstyles that might be required, at least in some instances. There are people with less patience who don't want to tackle the same boss for the 10th or more time. There are people who just don't have enough free time to get good. They may be able to inch their way through the story, but then something might happen in their lives and they have to put the game away for a few weeks, and when they come back, they have to relearn a bunch of things they painfully acquired the first time around and simply just put the game down for good. And that's okay. It's okay for people not liking the Souls-like genre. It's okay for people not getting into these games. People who hate on the Souls games for lacking difficulty options are as annoying as those who religiously try to convert people into liking these games. There are always a bunch of reasons for why people can't play a certain game. Sometimes as simple as, I can't deal with a certain topic. Like me when it comes to spiders. There are a lot of games out there that I just can't play or can't finish because I just can't deal with certain challenges containing these 8-legged monstrosities. And if someone gets a mod for his game or a trainer that buffs up all his stats, then more power to them. Those are always options that should be encouraged inside the gaming community, but it's not a requirement the developer needs to fulfill. I mean, I've heard of a mod that turns all the spiders in Skyrim into bears. And well, if it helps some people enjoy the game more, why not? So, Elden Ring is a great game. One of the most fun in recent years for me. It's not my favorite Souls game, but it's one of my favorite open world games. Up there with Breath of the Wild, which incidentally also wasn't my favorite Zelda game, not even in the top 5. There are a lot of flaws in this game, which I mentioned, like the relentless way bosses attack you and how overly reliant on homing attacks they are, or the way the difficulty progression works. From what I've heard, the game is, or at least was, riddled with bugs and glitches that From Software are working on, but it seems every issue they solve creates another one, at least for some players. Things like invisible enemies or the player horse, deleted save files and crashes. I fortunately didn't run into too many issues. The game randomly crashed on me once and then scolded me for not shutting down the game correctly. And maybe 2 or 3 times I ran into a group of enemies that weren't really invisible, but haven't been rendered until they were right on top of me. Sometimes the lock-on just won't activate or is lost even though the targeted enemy was still right in the center of the screen. And well, you shouldn't look too closely at a lot of textures. Souls games aren't known for their graphical prowess. That said, the art design is once again amazing. Every direction you look at is another wallpaper, and you get to explore most of these incredible looking places. Same goes for enemy designs as well as weapons and armor. Everything has been meticulously designed with great attention to detail. And once again, everything has purpose. There's a reason for why an enemy looks the way they do. You might not know or understand the reason, but it's there. Maybe there's even a reason for the dancing trees. Sound design is great as well. Every enemy type has a certain way they sound, so you can distinguish between them just from hearing them. Armored or huge enemies have loud footsteps that create a feeling of dread when you're creeping through a dungeon and only hear what lies in store for you later down the line. Weapons sound weighty, attacks impactful, and successful parries or staggers and even kills have a really satisfying sound. Music is mostly reserved for boss fights or special moments like in previous Souls games. You're mostly treated to the sounds of nature or the cracking of wood, the flutter of clothes, the wind blowing through the streets and windows. It's really atmospheric and never boring. Though they added a kind of combat music to this game, I guess, so you'll notice if you're being chased in the open world. It's a bit like 3D Zelda games and comes with the same issues when you're quickly stepping in and out of combat. When you clear out an enemy camp and pick off enemies one by one, the music tends to fade in and out a lot. It's not too bad because the music is still very understated for what it is. So yeah, Elden Ring is an awesome game. I have way too much fun with it, despite some of the issues. And it is a game I will recommend without second thought, full well knowing that it is made with a certain niche in mind. So if you're fine with a very challenging experience, with a game that has you learn through failure over and over and over again, that wants you to approach each challenge slowly and carefully, but also be able to react in an instant. If you're fine with that, then of course give this game a try. Its core mechanics are incredibly well designed and the whole experience is very rewarding. And with that, I bid you adieu. Have a great day, that's it from Rady, and maybe try going outside and touch grace, and find yourself a maiden.
Spoken echoes linger here, words of Queen Marika, who vanished long ago. If you wish, I will share them with you.